Chapter 5. Advice from a Caterpillar. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other for some time in silence. At last the caterpillar took the hookah out of his mouth and addressed her in a languid, sleepy voice. "Well then, who are you?" said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for a conversation. Alice replied rather shyly, "I hardly know, sir. Just at present. At least I know who I was when I got up this morning. But I think I must have been changed several times since then." "What do you mean by that?" said the caterpillar. "Explain yourself already." "Well, I can't explain myself, I'm afraid, sir," said Alice, "because I'm not myself, you see." "I don't see," said the caterpillar. "I don't know how to put it more clearly," Alice replied, as politely as she could manage, "for I can't understand it myself to begin with. And being so many different sizes in one day is very confusing for me." "No, it isn't," said the caterpillar. "Well, perhaps you haven't found that out yet then," said Alice. "But when you have to turn into a chrysalis, and you will someday, you know, and then after that into a butterfly, I should think you'll feel quite strange then, won't you?" "Not a bit," said the caterpillar. "Well, perhaps your feelings might be different," said Alice. "All I know is it would feel very strange to me." "You," said the caterpillar. "Who are you?" This brought them back again to the beginning of the conversation. Alice felt a little irritated at the caterpillars making such very short remarks, and she drew herself up and said, very gravely, "I think you ought to tell me who you are first." "Why?" asked the caterpillar. Here was another puzzling question, and as Alice could not think of any good reason, and as the caterpillar seemed to be in a very unpleasant state of mind, she turned away. "Hey now, get back here," said the caterpillar. "I have something important to say." This sounded promising. Certainly. So Alice turned and came back to him again. "Now you hold your temper," said the caterpillar. "Is that all?" asked Alice, swallowing down her anger as well as she could. "No," said the caterpillar. Alice thought she might as well wait, as she had nothing else to do, and perhaps, after all, it might tell her something worth hearing. For some minutes, the caterpillar puffed away without speaking, but at last it unfolded its arms, took the hookah out of its mouth again, and said, "So you think you're changed, do you?" "I'm afraid I am, sir," said Alice. "I can't remember the things I used, and I don't keep the same size for 10 minutes." "Can't remember what things?" asked the caterpillar. "Well," said Alice, "I've tried to say, 'How doth the busy bee?' but it all comes out different." "Okay then, repeat, 'You are old, Father William,'" said the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began, "You are old, Father William," the young man said, and your hair has become very white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think, at your age, that is right? In my youth, Father William replied to his son, I feared it might injure the brain. But now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again. You are old, said the youth, as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat. Yet you turned a back somersault in at the door. Pray, what is the reason of that? In my youth, said the sage, as he shook his grey locks, I keep all of my limbs very supple. By the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box. Allow me to sell you a couple. You are old, said the youth, and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it? In my youth, said his father, I took to the law and argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life. You are old, said the youth. One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever. Yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever? I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough, said his father. Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs. The caterpillar interrupted Alice. That is not said right. I know, not quite right, I'm afraid, said Alice timidly. Some of the words have gotten altered. No, it is wrong from beginning to end, said the caterpillar. And there was silence for some minutes. The caterpillar was the first to speak. Well, tell me then, what size do you want to be? Oh, I'm not particular to a size, Alice hastily replied. Only one doesn't like changing so often, you know. I don't know, said the caterpillar. Alice said nothing. She had never been so much contradicted in her life before, and she felt she was losing her temper. Are you content now? Asked the caterpillar. Well, I should like to be a little larger, sir, if you wouldn't mind, said Alice. 3 inches is such a wretched height to be. No, it's a very good height indeed, said the caterpillar. He reared himself upright as he spoke. He was exactly 3 inches high. But I'm not used to this, pleaded poor Alice, and she thought to herself, I wish the creatures wouldn't be so easily offended. You'll get used to it in time, said the caterpillar, and he put the hookah into his mouth and began smoking again. This time, Alice waited patiently until he chose to speak on his own. In a minute or 2, the caterpillar took the hookah from his mouth and yawned once, and then gave himself a little shake. Then he got down off the mushroom and crawled away in the grass. He remarked as he went, one side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow smaller. One side of what? The other side of what? Alice thought to herself. Of the mushroom, silly, said the caterpillar, just as if she'd asked her question aloud. And in another moment, he had gone from her sight. Alice remained looking thoughtfully at the mushroom for a moment, trying to make out which were the two sides of it, and as it was perfectly round, she found this a very difficult question. However, at last she stretched her arms round it as far as they would go, and broke off a bit of the edge in each hand. Well, now which is which, she said to herself, and nibbled a little of the right-handed bit to try for effect. The next moment she felt a violent blow underneath her chin, for it had struck her foot. She was a good deal frightened by this very sudden change, but she felt that there was no time to be lost. She was shrinking so rapidly. So she set to work at once to eat some of the other side. Her chin was pressed so closely against her foot that there was hardly room to open her mouth. But she did at last, and managed to swallow a morsel of the left-hand bit. "Hey, my head's free at last," said Alice in a tone of delight, which changed into alarm in another moment, when she found that her shoulders were nowhere to be found. All she could see, when she looked down, was an immense length of neck, which seemed to rise like a stalk out of the sea of green leaves that lay far below her. "What can all this green stuff be?" asked Alice. "And where have my shoulders gone? And oh, my poor hands, how is it I can't see you?" She was moving them about as she spoke, but no result seemed to follow, except a little shaking among the distant green leaves. As there seemed to be no chance of getting her hands up to her head, she tried to get her head down to them, and was delighted to find that her neck would bend about easily in any direction, like a serpent. She had just succeeded in curving it down into a graceful zigzag, and was going to dive in among the leaves, which she found to be nothing but the tops of the trees under which she had been wandering. Suddenly, a sharp hiss made her draw back in a hurry. A large pigeon had flown into her face and was beating her violently with its wings. "Get away, serpent!" screamed the pigeon. "I am not a serpent," said Alice indignantly. "Leave me alone." "Serpent, I say again," repeated the pigeon, but in a more subdued tone, and he added with a kind of sob, "I've tried every way, and nothing seems to suit them." "I haven't the least idea of what you're talking about," said Alice. "I've tried the roots of trees, and I've tried the banks, and I've tried the hedges," the pigeon went on. "But those serpents, there's no pleasing them." Alice grew more and more puzzled, but she thought there was no use in saying anything more until the pigeon had finished. "As if it wasn't enough trouble hatching the eggs," said the pigeon, "but I must be on the lookout for serpents, night and day. Why, I haven't had a wink of sleep in 3 weeks. "I'm very sorry you've been annoyed," said Alice, who was beginning to see his meaning. "And just as I'd taken the highest tree in the wood," continued the pigeon, he raised his voice to a shriek, "and just as I was thinking I'd be free of them at last, they must needs come wriggling down from the sky. Get away, serpent." "But I'm not a serpent, I tell you," said Alice. "I am a—" "Well, what are you then?" said the pigeon. "I can see you're trying to invent something." "I'm a little girl," said Alice, rather doubtfully, as she remembered the number of changes she had gone through that day. "A likely story indeed," said the pigeon, in a tone of the deepest contempt. "I've seen a good many girls in my time, but never one with a neck like that. No, you're a serpent, and there's no denying it. I suppose you'll be telling me next that that you've never tasted an egg." "Well, I have tasted eggs, certainly," said Alice. "But little girls eat eggs, more than serpents, I'm afraid." "I don't believe you," said the pigeon. "But if they do, why then they're a kind of serpent, and that's all I can say." This was such a new idea to Alice that she was quite silent for a moment. This gave the pigeon the opportunity to add, "You're looking for eggs, I know that well enough. And what does it matter to me whether you're a little girl or a serpent?" "It matters a good deal to me," said Alice. "But I'm not looking for eggs, as it happens. And if I was, I shouldn't want yours, because I don't like them raw." "Well, be off then," said the pigeon, as he settled down again into his nest. Alice crouched down among the trees as well she could, for her neck kept getting entangled among the branches, and every now and then she had to stop to untwist it. After a while, she remembered that she still held pieces of mushroom in her hands, and she set to work very carefully, nibbling first at one and then the other, and growing sometimes taller and sometimes shorter, until she had succeeded in bringing herself down to her somewhat normal height. It was so long since she had been anything near the right size that it felt quite strange to her at first, but she got used to it in a few moments. She began talking to herself, as usual. "Come on now, there's half my plan done. How puzzling all these changes are. I'm never sure what I'm going to be from one moment to another. However, I've got back to my right size, so the next thing is, how do I get into that beautiful garden? How is that to be done, I wonder?" As she said this, she came suddenly upon an open place with a little house in it, about 4 feet high. "Whoever lives here," thought Alice, "it'll never do to come upon them this size. Why, I don't want to frighten them out of their wits." So she began nibbling at the right-hand bit again, and did not venture to go near the house until she had brought herself down to 9 inches high.